Monica, it would be interesting to bring in some of the data you have been privy to in terms of how the board executive relations contribute to the culture of constructive debate. So what are some of the practical tools and what's required from both sides?
Mm-hmm. Many questions. So I am going back to the mutual openness and trust. That's fundamental. I mean, we're always coming back to those themes when we talk about constructive debate. I think our data, for instance, very interesting, shows that a very good collaboration within the board is a very strong indicator how well board interacts with the management. So without giving any numbers, I think that's a very interesting one. And again, the tone is set from the top in terms of a constructive debate. I think that's very important. And that's when you go out and ask the management how they analyze and their impression of the board. Those numbers are very interesting because it's not always as the board believes about being a benchmark, etc. But building a communication-focused approach instead of reporting, as I mentioned earlier, that's really something that is also basis of the to create a constructive debate. But it requires a very strong cooperation between the board and management. I think that's also fundamental. And talking about data, so high level of interaction between the board and management strongly correlates to the board performance, innovation climate, but also the quality of reporting. Innovation 50% up, and strong interaction between those two stakeholders affects reporting up 35%. So some practical tools. So a constructive debate, you need to have the priorities, we talked about the priorities, right and aligned. Otherwise, you can't get the effectiveness going, and you need to identify the gaps in the alignment where they sit. Could be with whom and in what area. Could be strategy, culture, innovation, risk, etc. And I'm coming back to board evaluations. That really professional board evaluations should really underpin openness, feedback, constructive debate, as we're speaking about now, and also highlight clearly the areas for improvements and the most important, early warning signs, of course. And end of the day, successful boards make sure that the board and the CEO and the executive team end up on the same side of the challenges instead of questioning each other. That's really fundamental. Coming back to these two questions I mentioned earlier, and that's a very practical tool, being very specific. Where do you need our help? And both sides need to take responsibility for a constructive debate. That's my fundamental thinking. And it's about transparency, proactivity, thinking outside the box, courage to change traditional patterns, even turning the board agenda upside down. We had that with somebody a board the other day. And you need to be courageous, and maybe you just change the board agenda, start from the very end, for instance. And again, look at data from your board evaluation, because that is the best way to guide each company forward.
Thank you. I'm watching the poll results here, and in the response to the question about the value perceived, the value that the executive team gets from the board, half of the audience thinks it's a high return on the time invested, and half of the audience thinks it's a bit of both. Nobody sees it as a necessary evil. Oliver, in the practical terms, what does the need to foster a constructive debate and the quest for maximization of the input from both sides, what does it mean in terms of recruitment?
Gosh, I wonder where all those CEOs are. Obviously not on the call. I think there are sort of three things you're thinking about. One is around sort of insight and competence. Second is around engagement, and the third is around diversity of perspectives. So insight competence, what we see, a lot of boards struggle to find people who are both have deep expertise, but also that general business experience and board suitability. And normally it's because they're just not casting that net wide enough. And so that is the key thing when you're sometimes you hear boards say, well, we just can't find the person who offers exactly what we need, and normally it's just because they've looked in too small an area. Related to that, I would say, is the engagement piece. There's a good piece by McKinsey actually, again, around the average time spent by best-in-class board directors on a role, and it's something like 40 days. And certainly it's been my experience as well. Really good board directors stand out by the amount of time that they put in preparation outside the boardroom. And what we sort of see, you get some board members often where they've gone through, more of a traditional process where they haven't really cast the net wide. They've gone for the same old names who already have a number of board roles, and they just don't have the time to give. Whereas when you go out beyond the sort of traditional and you find people who are really hungry for it, you create that competitive dynamic amongst the sort of candidate pool. You get people who are really putting in the time, really keen to show they're capable of doing the role. You see a similar happen in other areas. It's like with first-time investment funds, they tend to outperform second-time investment funds. So that engagement is absolutely critical. And I think probably related to that is assessing board members. I was reading this wonderful bit of research recently where apparently at the age of 40, your brain volume starts declining at 0.2% a year. By the time you hit 60, it's 0.5% a year, and after that, it very quickly starts to look like Moore's law. So having, given how important it is for boards to be able to react, digest information, respond to live situations, it's not just experience, having some sort of thing in place that is assessing your board directors, because we do see quite a few where you think they're not capable of really responding anymore to live stimuli. And then the final piece is that sort of diversity of perspectives, which has been a hot topic for a while now. I think the key thing boards think about is diversity is an infinite thing. No board could have diversity across all the dimensions possible. So it becomes a real question then of what's the sort of situationally most relevant diversity to have on your board. And when you get your first CEO on a board, it's really helpful. The second one, really helpful. Third one, probably diminishing returns. By the time you got the fifth or sixth, just adding no incremental value. So thinking about that diversity of perspective is critical to fostering that constructive debate.
Thanks, Oliver. You have answered actually